Imagine yourself under a starry sky, around the warm glow of a sacred fire, where speakers gather to share their wisdom and insights. Creating a sacred space where all are welcome to warm their hands, here are your hosts, Sarenth Odinson, Snow, Cabra, and Emily Streaking Fate. Discuss spirituality, mythology, animism, and culture around a virtual sacred fire. Won't you join us around Grandfather Fire?
Hail to the magicians. Hail to the ones who reveal. Hail to the ones who wield, who work with, who strive for magic. The blessed ones, the damned, the cursing ones, the healing ones, all those in between, all those beyond reckoning. The gods and goddesses who wield might, the ancestors who brought power, the spirits who align and teach and tutor and cajole. Hail to all you beings of magic, the wise and the impulsive, the greedy and the beneficent. Hail to all you blessed ones who work with the star stuff of the universe. Hail to all you beautiful beings, all you ugly beings, all you sweet and sour beings. All you beings who are heavy and light, who do the needed work, who do the frivolous work, who do your own work, so that fate keeps turning, so that the carving keeps happening, so that the spinning doesn't stop. Hail to all of you magicians, all of you spirit workers, all of you who wield and work magic. Hail to you and thank you. Let's do how.
So mote it be.
So welcome to yet another episode of Around Grandfather Fire. This is episode 139 with my good friends and co-hosts Snow and Emily Streaking Fate. How are you both doing tonight?
I am good. My sleep cycle is a mess because I traveled through time and space and I'm now back across the Atlantic Ocean into the British and Irish Isles part of Afro-Eurasia. And it is interesting and my body doesn't know what it's doing. But I'm here and I have been writing. And if you want to read more about my reflecting upon being in America, I did that on my website recently. And I've rambled a lot about my American experiences on the last couple of episodes as well. So, yeah.
Did you write about me?
I did.
Yes.
So, Emily, how's about you?
I am doing all right. I am also tired. As I mentioned, I think on the last episode, I went through an initiation like a few days before that episode. And I am trying to work with having just a lower energy pool to pull from right now. So trying to accept help when it's offered and ask for help when I need it, which is a little challenging, but I've had a lot of spirits and friends offer and help out with things, which is appreciated. What about you, Sarah?
Oh gods, let's see. Shortly before this month began, I had the gumption and the energy and just blew through all of my writing assignments for the month, including topics and prayers that I'm supposed to write for my Patreon. So that'll be going up progressively throughout the month every Wednesday, just like last month. Huge kudos to Kunian and Malik for getting those into me early so I could just bang them out. Um, Let me think. What else have I been up to? Oh, yeah. So you can't see it if you're listening to this, but I have a new spiritual item which has come into the house. It is called a yarn stuffer, which is a spirit tool used to commune with and direct spirits. I'm going to give a really quick verbal description for those who are just listening to the show. It is a rod of iron, primarily, twisted in several places, alternating between clock and counterclockwise. And there is a four-pronged cage in the middle of this, top of which is a long hand length of iron, bronze, silver, and steel. There's also bronze, silver, steel, and silver. There I said silver, didn't I? Kind of distributed throughout the rest of the piece in different splotches, and some are shined up to kind of show through. But what this is this is a save tool. This is a tool for working with and bringing in spirits. I just had this finished by my very dear friend and excellent blacksmith, Pat. Five Feline Forage, I believe, is still the website where you can find their work. This took, like most of the ritual tools, this takes them time because they actually are building it from the ground up. This started off as a length of iron and it eventually grew into the piece that it is. It's about, I want to say, 4.5 feet in length from tip to top. And so it was really exciting watching them do this because I was giving them reference photos from uh, Neil Price's The Viking Way so that they had reference sheets and such to go off of. And this looks very much like one of the finds that is in the book. What I find particularly neat about this one is not it's the perfect height for me to walk with it as an actual staff. So this is just really exciting and oh,
And the
yeah.
base metal is from the same place as your runes, correct?
It's from the same place as my runes and my spear. Actually, there's metal from both pieces that were left over from both projects that Pat ended up incorporating into this. And
Those the graveyard
yeah,
runes?
those are the runes from
Yeah.
the graveyard gate. Yeah. So very, very happy and excited for this.
I'm sure we'll get a photo to put in the episode description for people to check out and add a link and stuff.
Yep. So that's
Yep.
what's been going on with me. So folks have already kind of heard. Would you like to introduce our guest?
Sure. So when I was in the Cascadia region of the Americas, over on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, I had the great fortune to meet someone who has been a colleague and whose podcast I've been a fan of for quite a few years now, Reverend Erik Arneson of the Arnemancy podcast. So Reverend Erik has over 2 decades of experience with reading tarot and almost as many years spent studying the occult, hermetic, and the esoteric generally. Reverend Erik L. Arneson has an intuitive connection with tarot cards, officiates weddings, and in his work at Arnemancy dives into the occult, the esoteric, and the magical in both written and audio form. Reverend Erik is also a Freemason, a software developer, and author. So, Reverend Erik, welcome to Around Grandfather Fire.
Why, thank you very much. I think there are two things I would change about that introduction. I think it's probably 3 decades. And also, I'm not really sure that I would say that I have a very intuitive connection to tarot. I've been doing it for so long that I would say that it's a very practiced connection, but I'm not sure that it started off intuitive. And I don't know that I necessarily do intuitive style readings. There's always intuition in divination, though, right? I mean, I guess you can't really escape it, but I guess well, I'd have to think about that one.
So I guess on that point then, how did you get into tarot to begin with?
Well, when I was a kid, probably 14 or 15, my parents used to take us, my brother and I, to this little town on the Oregon coast called Bandon, and there was this like little independent bookshop there that had a section on like witchcraft and magic stuff, and I got a tarot deck, and it was the Alice in Wonderland tarot, or Wonderland tarot, I can't remember, but that was my first one, and I just kept going from there. I guess tarot is a hell of a drug. You kind of get one deck, and then before long you've got like two, and as soon as you have two decks, then it's all over. They just breed in captivity. You leave the room and you come back and there's more of them and then more of them. In fact, recently I was kind of like, oh yeah, I've only got like one shoebox full of tarot decks, but that ended up not being true. I have like four. I keep finding shoe boxes full of tarot decks that I've stashed in the closet, and I'm like, "Where? I don't even remember this one." so,
So I
so it's danger.
like tribbles.
I know we
Yeah.
can relate in this household because we have bookshelves that seem to breed with each other.
Yeah.
So have
Yeah.
you dabbled in other divination methods over the years, or has it pretty much just been tarot?
Tarot's been the main one, but I've also, I mean, part of learning ceremonial magic, you get into other styles of divination. So I've done some geomancy. I've done some I Ching badly. I've done a little bit of astrology, although I don't really consider myself much of an astrologer. Um, I am currently experimenting with augury. It's the worst time of year to do that though, because the birds are all like flying away. So I'm gonna be a poor augur over the winter, and then when the birds come back in the spring, I'll be like, oh, I've got this.
Spend
There's so
spend
many
all
birds.
winter going, nah, the readings all look
Yeah,
bad.
yeah. I also have a magic 8 ball. Um, and yeah, I mean, and also, I've used ad hoc divination methods. Once you start to kind of get the hang of divination, you do sort of start to, develop some of your own methods here and there. So, I've done like divination on the fly using like rocks and pavement squares and stuff like that, which I guess is probably intuitive divination, huh? I mean, there's no like book to read. I didn't get like, Llewellyn's book of throwing rocks at the sidewalk.
So at this point, is is tarot your preferred method, or at this point is it just kind of whatever happens to be at hand?
Tarot is definitely my preferred method. I've just practiced it. I can say this word. I've practiced with it so much that it's just easy. I can pick up any tarot deck and just use it. Which is only half true. I feel like Marseille decks require a bit of a different approach, so I don't use Marseille tarot very often. I've only done a few readings with like Thoth tarot, so basically, so it's like Waite-Smith tarot, I guess, is my favorite style. But even then, I'm not sure I follow the same rules as everybody else. So it's who knows? Who knows? That's a good question. I wish I had a better answer. I did have a ramble though.
So you kind of get the deck and you go, the guidebook's in there, but it's a guide. It's not the
Yeah.
rules.
Yeah, and I'm like, I didn't bring my reading glasses. I'm not looking at those tiny little letters.
So if you got into other divination methods through getting into ceremonial magic, then how did you come
hmm
to get into ceremonial magic, and sort of how big was the gap between that getting tarot in that shop as a kid in Bandon, Oregon, and then ceremonial magic?
I think I probably started getting into ceremonial magic around 98 or 99, and I embarked on a pretty serious practice of it in 2000. I know it was 2000. It was the same year I was initiated into Freemasonry, and the same year I got married. Um, so it's an easy year to remember too. It's just a bunch of zeros. Um, and I was actually part of an online group on Yahoo groups. Do y'all remember Yahoo groups?
Yeah.
And the group is called
The
Tamarisk
old
Crescent.
magic.
I don't. Yes, yes. And the group it started off as sort of a little discussion group, and then together everybody decided that we were going to work through Donald Michael Craig's Modern Magic. So I, got way into it and set up altars and built tools and did all that kind of stuff. And I worked. I don't know how long I worked through that, but I worked through it for a while. I met teachers and other people in person and just kept learning and went gone through initiations and things like that. But one of the things that happened really early on is, you know, when you do like Donald Michael Craig stuff, it's like, budget Golden
Mm-hmm.
Dawn solo practice stuff, like 90% of the magicians you meet, they know the LBRP, but they've never been initiated into the Golden Dawn, like that sort of stuff. So I've never been initiated it. Yeah, I've never been initiated into the Golden Dawn. But I learned like all of those rituals out of, Rigardi's books and out of Modern Magic. And
I still have that book on my shelf with the blue pentagram on it.
oh yeah, oh yeah, I definitely still have mine. It's pretty battered, but
Mm.
yeah, I still have it. Um, but one of the things that happens when you are working through systems like that is, you record your dreams. You keep like journals and stuff like that. And for as long as I can recall, uh, I've always had the fortune to be very good at recall with dream recall. So I've always had vivid dreams and done a pretty good job remembering them. And luckily, I don't really get have nightmares, or maybe I do, and I'm just sort of like, this is cool. There's so many tentacles. um, but one of my teachers at the time, we were talking about it, and I was sort of talking about how, going through this like Golden Dawn self-initiation stuff was like really um, not doing it for me. And he was like, "Well, tell me about your dreams lately." And I was telling him, and he was like, "That dream you had right there was describing a self-initiation ritual, so you should do that." So I started sort of paying attention to that and using dreams to create self-initiation rituals, but also since I was kind of following like an elemental scheme for degrees at each level, I would be like, oh, it's time to work on earth stuff, so I'm going to learn geomancy. Oh, it's time to work on this stuff, so I'm going to learn whatever. So that's sort of what led me into. I don't remember the original question. I totally just answered a question that I thought that maybe you might have asked. So but yeah, it led me down the ceremonial magic rabbit hole. Definitely led me to other forms of divination. I'm not sure that I tried anything else before, um, anything other than tarot before I got into uh, magic.
So you said you sort of got into ceremonial magic and Freemasonry around the same time then?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so
yeah.
how did you come to Freemasonry then? Was that a separate thing, or were they kind of intertwined when you got into it?
It was intertwined. When I was a kid, I had been part of the DMLA, which is like a Freemasons boys group thing, but it never really stuck. I didn't really feel like I belonged there or anything of that nature. Um, but when I started getting into ceremonial magic, I realized that I needed to have an initiatory experience in order to understand what initiatory experiences are supposed to be like. Um, and I also sort of wanted to have something that sort of acted as like a coming of age experience, while also sort of feeling like I was more involved with the community at large. And Freemasonry kind of like fit all of those. So I went down to the local lodge and went through the process and got initiated. And it did sort of, I mean, it has certainly served its purpose. I've remained active in Freemasonry. Well, I mean, I've remained a member for, since 2000. It's been a long time.
24 years is nothing to sneeze at. That's pretty good.
So,
I
is
know.
your interest in augury connected to the ceremonial magic or the Freemasonry, or is that just an interest that developed on its own?
My interest in augury is definitely related to the ceremonial magic. I'm mostly interested in augury because of Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa's three books of occult philosophy. He's got a whole chapter on augury that was taken from a classical source, from a a classical Latin source. And it's interesting because, you know, there's a lot of cool math. Okay, I'm not going to nerd out about math too much unless you guys like really egg me on. But there's a lot of like math hidden in Renaissance and medieval grimoires and magical techniques. And probably like the most obvious is geomancy, you know, where you have like a binary system where every geomantic reading can be, you know, represented by like a 4-bit number, a 8-bit number or whatever. So when I was looking at the augury stuff in Eric Perdue's new translation, I was kind of like, this is almost a binary system. There are like a certain set of variables that you're supposed to be looking at. You know, are the birds coming from behind you or from before you? Are they crossing? Are they landing? Are they just sitting there pooping? Like, what the hell are the birds doing? And so there are all these things where there are these sort of like on-off switches. And I started kind of charting it out, and I was like, this is way more complicated than I was thinking at first. Some of this doesn't make sense. Some of it doesn't make sense, which happens a lot when you really dig into some of that stuff. You have to kind of be like, So that's why I started looking at augury. I'm interested in that kind of you know, like that semiotic shift that Patrick Dunn talks about in language. You know, the book that has 4 words in the title: language, magic, ritual, power, whatever the hell it's called.
Yeah.
Symbol. There's symbol in there. You know that word. You know that book. He talks about this method of doing divination that involves sort of like observing your environment or operating in your environment by like shifting your consciousness before you step outside or when you step through a doorway or something like that. And so sort of like looking at that and then coming across Agrippa's discussion of omens and augury. Yes, magic, power, language, symbol. That's the
You're
name of the
welcome.
book. Thank you.
It was bugging me.
Sarah. Yeah. I can always remember that it starts with magic, and then there's 3 words after it that are all really cool.
Yeah, as I was listening to you talk about it, like the first thing came to mind was like John Dee was a cryptographer. So many of the magicians throughout the centuries that we have references to or have copied books of books were huge math nerds and polymaths and polyglots. So like a lot of these guys come out of a milieu of education where you had to know your arithmetic to get accepted into some of these societies or into some of these teachings. And if you couldn't do 1 + 1, you were kind of SOL.
Yeah, and I mean, allow me to quote some Agrippa. You know, in Book 2, Chapter 1, he says that you can't be a magician if you don't know your math. So, I'm sorry, I know that a lot of people really hate math and don't want to hear that, but it's the truth.
I mean, I spent 2 months making disparaging jokes to my American fiance about how Americans only do the one math.
Which one math is
that? Because over here we do maths, whereas you guys only do the one math.
Math, not even once.
I am a bit of a math nerd, so I love hearing about it. Sarenth might not be as keen, but
if my eyes glaze over, just come downstairs and kick me. It's okay.
I mean, it kind of touches on so much because you see it in geomancy, you see it in astrology. If you get into gematria or isopsophy, it comes in there.
You can also see it in some rune forms as well, because there's actually some rune stones which have been discovered to have ciphers built into them with number correspondences.
Yeah, and let's not forget every conspiracy theorist's favorite, sacred geometry. Like, can you get more math?
Yes, and if you do the right combination, you turn all the friggin' frogs gay.
Hey, life finds a way, man. Life finds a way.
I mean, but it's really funny how this sneaks into literally everything, because not this conspiracy theories. I mean, obviously those too, but like the obsession with numbers even creeps into our novels and our pop culture. Like Darkseid is obsessed with finding the anti-life equation, for instance, in the DC comics. Like humanity's long been obsessed with finding the correct equation that lets us do the things we want to do. And I think that
Oh
I
yeah.
may not understand the math, but I find the implications fascinating. I don't understand quantum theory, but I find it fascinating.
Well, I mean, the easiest way to understand quantum theory is to remember that a quantum is the smallest possible measurable distance. And then after that, everything's cream cheese.
Neat. I am cream cheese.
Well, it's like if you look at anything to do with sort of the history of the esoteric or the history of magic or anything like that, they all go straight back to Pythagoras. And he's famous for, numbers and triangles.
Uh-huh.
Look at me, I made
Yeah.
a cult out of being a math nerd. I'm not sure what it says about my education, but the first thing I think of when it comes to Pythagoras is that damn Donald Duck episode.
Oh,
That was
Donald
Yes,
and Math Magic
Donald and
Land.
Math.
Yes. Make sure there's a link to it in the
Let me
show
go
notes.
find the damn thing.
I'm saying that to Jason. Jason, I know you're listening to this right now. Please immediately go put a link to Donald Duck and Math Magic Land in the show notes. I think you can find it on YouTube.
So is that also where, because of your love of numbers and how numbers sort of intersect with everything, do you view that as something
Uh-huh.
that connects your day job in coding and software with all of this stuff?
I do, although that's taken me a really long time to figure out. Um, when I first started getting into to magic, I already had a day job as a software developer at that point, and I'd already been working a lot. I did a lot of cryptography and anonymity stuff with software in the 90s and early 2000s, and I was obsessed with how there seemed to be a connection, but I couldn't really figure out what it was. And as I sort of moved through uh, the industry or the culture of cypherpunks and DEF CON and all that kind of stuff, I was constantly looking for people who were thinking about this stuff. The combination, the intersection between like cryptography and magic in particular was very interesting to me. And there's just nobody out there talking about it, nobody out there doing anything about it, and uh, I wasn't experienced enough with any of it to really figure anything out on my own. So, I feel like I'm getting a better handle on it and a better idea of what of how all that stuff is connected now. But it's taken me like decades, which is depressing. But I guess when the spirit enters you, it's the only way to it doesn't leave.
So kind of making those connections and sort of having those realizations, then do you view that as a way that you can sort of take your studies of Agrippa and all these other things and sort of make them fit in with modern technology and sort of bring them into 2024? Or is that not really something you're necessarily worried about?
I don't think I worry about it a whole lot. Almost all of the grimoire magic, I mean, almost all of the magic stuff that we have in the West was developed before modern mathematics.
Mhm.
So none of the math is like particularly tricky or difficult. Um, and so it tends to be like fairly simple to kind of like find ways to express a lot of the math with modern technology. I think that there's a lot of utility, and including like magical utility in doing the math by hand. But I also know that people won't.
Yeah.
because we love having our technology. So I do, I mean, I guess for the past few years, I have been writing a lot of software that sort of helps people out with the hard parts, or the medium hard parts, I guess. So yeah, I guess so. I guess in some ways, I'm not super obsessed with merging the two, but I do enjoy it. Like I enjoy tinkering with electronics. So I've made like gadgets and gizmos that help with magic. I've made, like flickering candles. I have a planetary clock on my altar that like changes color according to the planetary
Oh, that's
hour.
cool.
You know, I've played around with like sort of electronic music and planetary stuff. I've done that a little bit, not a whole lot. I have a project in my head that I haven't actually executed yet.
It's like music of the
Um,
spheres kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah. I mean, again, it's one of those things where there aren't enough music theory nerds who are also into like, you know, PGM magic to figure out like which chords go in which place and which scales go with which planet and all that kind of stuff. But you know, there are some pretty smart people out there who work with it and work on it. You know, like Drake the Swamp Wizard, who hopefully will listen to this episode at some point.
That is a badass name, Drake the Swamp
No, it
Wizard.
sounds like you need. Oh, go ahead.
I think he just goes by. Oh, he just goes by Drake, but he lives in a swamp, so I call him Drake
okay.
the
I'm like,
Swamp
that's
Wizard.
an awesome username. Fabulous. No notes.
I was just gonna say it sounds like Snow needs to recruit more music PGM people.
Yeah, maybe he needs to talk, or maybe Snow needs to talk about music online a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it gets interesting because I mean, we don't use Pythagorean tuning and we don't know what like they were using in Egypt or such. And I mean, anything pre-modern, like that's pretty much all theory.
Yeah, that's true. So there does have to be some
Yeah.
adaptation. And especially since, you know, adapting like electronic instruments to Pythagorean temperament or something like that is just an enormous pain in the ass. We have to go with whatever our default temperament is now. I can't even remember what it's called.
Yeah,
I've
when we use
Come on, Snow, you got like 2 degrees of
yeah,
this.
when we use like A440 and such. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
because I mean, you see people get medieval music sheets and stuff, and they're like, you have a bunch of squares on the
Mhm.
thing, but it doesn't tell you note length durations. We've got no idea what anything was tuned to.
oh
Like,
wow.
so I mean, and it,
I
yeah,
mean, it was probably like every town had their own
right.
A.
I mean, that's the other thing because I
Yeah.
know, who was it? 12 Tone on YouTube, the really cool music
hmm
theory channel, did a video talking about how actually it was around the time of the World Wars that orchestras from different countries, like national orchestras, decided to agree and standardize to one concert pitch. So before then,
Yeah,
if you went to
yeah,
go see a
yeah.
Beethoven symphony in Paris and a Beethoven symphony in Germany, they'd sound different.
What's your favorite A?
What's my favorite A? I mean, I'm lazy, so probably 440 because that's what everything else is using.
Same here. I'm a 440 kind of person.
Uh, what?
So 440 hertz, that's
So
waves in a
yeah,
second, like cycles.
mhm. Yeah, that's the A right above middle
Mhm.
C. That's like the standard note that you start all your
Okay.
tuning from.
Thank you.
So if you walk up to a piano and lift the lid up, the C that's going to be roughly in the middle in front of you is going to be middle C. So then the A to the right
It
of
sounds like
that.
this. Wait, hold on, hold on. I think I have a piano on here.
Unfortunately, your noise suppression is killing
And then
it.
here's A. What? That's not fair. Well, that's
We
too
got
bad. I guess
no,
you don't
we
get
got
to
a
hear
very
it.
quick attack and then like an instant release on that.
Well, maybe I should turn off my noise suppression.
Just
I mean, I have a mixing board between me and Zoom that's probably taking care of all that already. Let me see what happens. Settings. I'm sorry, Jason. I know you're listening to this right now and you're like, no, what are you doing?
We're sidebarring
Um,
this
Originals.
because it's just driving us crazy.
Okay, how's this?
I can't hear shit.
Um,
Have you turned
well, that's a
original
bummer.
sound for musicians on?
I
Oh,
did. I
neat.
just
Usually that
did.
takes care of my problem.
Maybe you can't do it in the middle of a call.
yeah.
Oh well.
Maybe
Well,
afterwards record some and then we'll like
what are we
edit
gonna?
it in.
And by we mean, of course, Jason.
Sorry, Jason.
We tried, but that's good to know, because like I'm sitting here like y'all are speaking in a whole different language. Usually, when folks like myself, so I'm a drama theater guy, and so like my teacher was a former opera singer, like on the West Coast, and she was fabulous. Unfortunately, I think she has since passed away. So honor to her memory. Um, Thank you for all the lessons, Miss Nevins. Um, she did start us off with having to match tone with the piano and then go from there for our different music, because we did one musical in the fall / winter, and then we do a play in the spring. And so part of her challenge was getting sometimes tone deaf theater kids to sing. And so like I totally understand of having to get us to sync to the piano first and then go from there.
Yeah. Yeah, but it was sort of like, we didn't have a way of measuring hertz until modern times, right? So nobody really had that concept of music being, waveforms at all, or measurable waveforms. So yeah, so the sort of like, I guess the theory is that like every region or every band or whatever would have their own sort of, I don't know, mother note.
Wow, that's wild.
I'm doing jazz hands for that, by the way, for those of you listening afterwards. Mother note.
I mean, I guess because we know that, Ptolemaic stuff and Pythagorean stuff, and they get into, Saturn would be with this note, or Saturn would be with this scale, or with this, but we don't actually know which note that would have been. And because we're using entirely different tuning systems now, it's, so you do kind of see modern magicians and occultists and stuff basically arbitrarily picking a note that sounds like it feels appropriate.
Yeah, and I have definitely done that. Like one of the things that I have a lira that I use when I'm doing like planetary magic and that sort of stuff, and I usually just kind of improvise, when it comes to the magical part of prayer time, and I like it that way. I don't know that I necessarily, I mean, sometimes I'll come across something where I'm like, oh yeah, this particular pattern, this particular melody sounds like Saturn, or this sounds, Jupiterian, jovial, so I'll find those every once in a while, but not every time. And I like to just sort of make it up as I go along too.
Yeah, I know with my own devotional music, where it's typically been more sort of God-based or spirit-based rather than planetary, but a lot of that is just kind of messing around with synth or instruments or things and just kind of letting it guide me into what feels appropriate for whoever it's devoted to.
Yeah.
So it's
for sure that
it's not like I have a list that's like, so for Odin I'm going to write in B flat major, and then for like,
Do we even know what Old Norse music was like? Do we even have an idea of what their instruments were or anything like that? We must have found some musical instruments or remnants of them or some
I mean, we've got
like
the frames of what would have been frame drums, and we've got like bones that would have been flutes and things like that. But again,
do they have strings?
That is a good. I mean, probably, because I mean, there are records of them encountering like the Arabians around the Mediterranean stuff. So I'm sure the Norse probably encountered string instruments.
Oh, true.
Sorry, Sarenth, you were going to say.
Though there are like harpa forms that do date back quite a while. But the problem is that most of the finds that we have, as far as those go, are, I believe, medieval. I don't think we actually have any pre-Christian North finds where it's a string. Like, certainly it could be a stringed instrument, but nothing where we're like absolutely certain it's a harpa or whatever, or a toggle harpa.
And again, you get into the issue of not knowing how these things were tuned, so what scales and keys and things. I mean, that's one thing I do appreciate about Wardruna, the big sort of band, is that the guy from Wardruna has been in interviews and kind of laughed and said, well, anyone who thinks this is historically accurate is a fool. He's like, we have no idea what that stuff sounded like, and this sure doesn't sound like folk stuff when I was growing up. So
no. Right. Yeah. It's one of the things that. Oh, sorry.
I'm just sort of imagining like Viking jug bands showing up on distant shores.
The invaders have come.
It's like Mungo Jerry's summertime.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's one of the funny things. Like when you hear modern like neo folk, when it comes to like old like Norse stuff, where it's like it's Wardruna or it's Halung, like they both go out of their way to be like, we have no fucking idea what this sounded like. This is a modern creation of like what we think, what we're feeling, what we're interacting with as far as these spirits go. And I think as long as we're being like really honest about that when we're talking about modern creations, whether we're using solfeggio frequency, magic, manipulation things, like as long as we're like being really clear, like we have not really a big historical basis for any of this stuff. It just sounds pretty. We like it, and it makes us think of blah. Like, at least we're being intellectually honest.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I totally, and I also, as much as like as much as I think historical reconstruction is impressive, I also totally am. I think that it's way more important for us as modern pagans to have personal relationships with the gods that are going to be expressed in our own ways. And maybe sometimes we'll find things that work super, super well for us, and maybe sometimes we don't. But we don't live in Uppsala, and we don't live in Athens or Alexandria in the first century, right? Like we live in the modern world, and we have to.
I like my modern toilets. Thank you.
Oh, me too. Me too. Also, I really love Keytars, and those weren't invented until like the 70s.
Yeah.
So, but I think that the ability for a practitioner, I think, and this I think is something that magicians become much better at the more they work with the gods. You get a feeling for what works. You get you get the happy feeling when things work right. Or, if you're working with like Saturn, then you get the sad feeling, and that's cool too.
That was something that was sort of wanting to kind of explore with you and ask you about, because you sort of know and interact with, I would say, about as many pagans as you do occultists, and you're kind of on that line sort of between the camps. It seems to me that pagans have more of an issue with that focus, hyper focus even on historical accuracy and trying to reproduce things or reconstruct things and stuff to a greater degree than I think occultists do, or at least.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Let's back up a second. What's the difference between a pagan and an occultist? I'm not. This isn't a joke lead up. I'm just asking.
Well, I was going to say, sort of, and also, because I know some people don't see much of a difference there. Because I was talking to a friend about this the other day, and I think occultists are more okay with pagans than pagans are with occultists.
Really?
Sarenth is nodding as well. Yeah. Because in my experience, occultists look at pagans and they're like, well, they just kind of focus a bit more on the gods and maybe don't do as many magical workings and maybe just do ritual a bit more than we do. Whereas pagans sit there and go, occultists are making stuff up, not focusing on history, and they're all into Crowley and all that weird stuff.
Okay, well, I think that I am both. I don't know that I necessarily see a really big line there, but also like occultists are obsessed with history. I mean, think of grimoire purists. Think of Kabbalists. Think of PGM nerds. Think of like all the occultists who, go for like the oldest possible grimoires they can get, or think of the poor fools who like collect every single Stephen Skinner book or whatever. And or the occult book collectors who line their shelves with, nice leather-backed volumes like the ones in my fake background. There's I don't know that I think that I would say occultists probably have a huge obsession with the history of their work, but also that's not really fair to say because occultist it's a really really broad term, I think, because it also would include chaos magicians and new agers and thelemites and people who like the Kabbalion and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because
So I'm not sure. I don't know that I necessarily buy the generalization, but but and I honestly also think I don't necessarily have a lot of interaction with pagans who aren't practitioners. I think almost all the pagans that I know in person are also magicians of some sort.
Right.
So maybe occultists or something. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm starting to feel like occultist isn't a very good label for people. Except that I think that of myself as one.
Because I know I consider
But maybe
myself to be
maybe
both.
labels
Yeah.
are bullshit. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not really
Okay,
sure.
so if I could poke at the definitions here, because I think for me the difference between an occultist, a magician, and a pagan is that a pagan is an umbrella term for various religious movements, some of whom may be occultists and magicians. So not all pagans are magicians or occultists, not all occultists are pagan, and not all magicians are pagan. What I think differentiates magicians from occultists is that magicians will work with, manipulate, or otherwise engage with the forces of the universe. But I think that occultism has this, it literally means hidden, right? So an occultist is somebody who works with the hidden. I think that what differentiates, where I come down to a lot of that is, so a lot of magicians will engage in like theurgy, god magic, or they'll engage with very forward-facing exoteric religious practices in a way that works with esoteric material, such as Sather oftentimes works with gods, ancestors, and Vatir. You can also consider this a cult. That gets into the weeds in heathenry, and that we don't need to go there just yet. But occultism, I think, works with the hidden forces and kind of rise this edge where a lot of witchcraft in the past did. So like hedge writers, things like that. You could consider those occultists because they're doing stuff behind the scenes. They're not forward facing. They're not community facing. They're folks that are doing shit in the background. And I think for me, that's the differentiation between an occultist and a magician, is that a magician is often a more accepted face. And they might be working with the same forces. It's just who they're serving with this work or what purpose they're serving communally.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I think as with anything, a lot of the finding the definitions for these things can get really tricky. I'm thinking of conversations I've had with Heather Freeman about this kind of stuff, where she's talked about like problematic uses of the word magic and things like that. Using magic as sort of an othering word or things like that. And I think magician sometimes gets used that way too. Like, what's the difference between a magician and a priest? Magician isn't on the church's payroll.
I honestly think that, like, for me, a lot of that comes down to like what you're serving and how. Because the magician and the priest can work with the same god, but they're going to do it in different ways, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, this is like I love words, I love language, so like
because
I feel like this is your podcast. You don't apologize for the tangents you lead us on.
Because I feel like, in my experience, the people who self-identify as pagans are either practicing a historically informed religion or a modern religion that leans very much on those ancient pre-Christian things. So things like Wicca or things like forms of Druidry. And the people who self-identify as occultists are the ones looking at John Dee's Enochian stuff. They're looking at Crowley. They're looking at the Golden Dawn. They're looking at Thelema. And that's much more sort of grimoire, demonic stuff, Solomonic stuff, sort of those connotations of kind of secret societies and things of that nature.
Yeah, I could see that. But I mean, and
Right.
honestly, I do both.
So that's why I was
I
sort of
guess
saying, as
I
someone who does both and sort of knows people,
Right.
ancient Hellenist, Reconstructionist types, as well
yeah.
as,
So would you consider folks who do Goetia in the archaic form, mind you, not in the
mm,
grimoire magic, are go
Oh, you mean
yes,
like
yes.
PGM?
Are they occultists?
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, absolutely.
thank
And they're
you.
pagans.
I
That's
would
where
say
I
that I would say they are occultists. I wouldn't necessarily say that was part of occultism because I
Really?
feel like occultism is like the modern movement, the modern stuff,
Yeah.
whereas they're occultists in that they're doing something esoteric and
Okay, okay. I
yeah.
see what you're saying. Yeah, and I mean it's funny when you get back to stuff that old, like when you get back to like PGM stuff, like actual like
Mhm.
historical Goes and stuff. I mean, we know that there are so many magical practices, things that we consider magical that were just incredibly
right.
commonplace back then. Like Deficciones, right? Like curse tablets, they're everywhere. We find them in like every ancient well and every ancient grave and shoved into the cracks of every building. Um,
Underneath every seat in the Herculaneum.
yeah.
I'll show you, motherfucker.
So, and then even as we get into like more modern stuff, like you mentioned, hedge riders, so like hedge workers and hedge witches and cunning men and stuff, like um, they mixed grimoire
Absolutely.
stuff, magic with more traditional, like possibly pre-Christian, like herbal traditions and healing traditions. Um, I mean, the modern world, we love to draw
Mhm.
lines. I feel like we're all living under this vile curse that like Linnaeus placed on our entire culture or something, where now we're like everything needs to fit into a happy bucket. Everything must be categorizable. And I'm not always really, really happy with that it it traps us. Categories are
Mhm.
traps. Labels are traps. So I do think that especially when there aren't very many of us, I mean, you count the pagans and occultists
Mhm.
all together, and there aren't a whole lot. It's almost like we don't really need to subdivide ourselves further. I mean, we're not metal fans, not all of us
Some of
anyhow.
us are.
So we don't need to do that thing where we're like,
Look, I'm much more a fan
true.
of the classic conjuration method by the stars. I'm not with this neo conjuration movement.
I think labels
Neo.
can be useful for finding communities and communicating generalities, general stuff. But I think once you find those communities,
Yeah, I agree.
the label itself is not useful so much. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, okay. I think that's a really good way to look at it. Um, yeah, I think labels should be tools, but not necessarily
Right.
limiters.
yeah,
Is that,
yeah, yes, tools,
is
but
that kind
not
of what you're
limiters.
saying,
I
Emily?
think they're helpful for, like I said, communicating more general stuff, finding people that like might you can connect with in a group, or communicating to someone maybe outside the group but has kind of an idea of what that label might mean. But once you get into more specific
Mm,
stuff, that label is not necessarily super useful. So yes,
yeah.
communicating,
Yeah.
but like not
I
limiting.
totally agree.
I mean, I feel like as well, once you get into it, you also then start to see the exceptions as well. And then you start to see the gaps in
Hmm.
sort of the rules for the label. I know I've used the
Yeah.
analogy
Yeah.
before of if you went into a record shop, the genre labels are fairly useful because if you find something you like in the reggae section, then you know to go back to the reggae section to find other stuff that you might like as well. The problems come round when that
Yeah, because it's going to sound exactly the same.
the problems come round when that becomes the only section you're looking in.
Hmm.
So like if those
Yeah.
become the sort of walls that you kind of have around you, then that's when it becomes a problem. But as sort of a guide where you're kind of figuring out what you like and feeling out from there, it can be helpful.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. I think that I agree with what y'all are saying on that. Yeah. I think mainly I was just sort of uh I was kind of surprised at. Okay, Jason, I apologize again. There's a button up here where I turned on the original Sound for Musicians thing, and it gave me a new button on Zoom that said off. Original Sound for Musicians off. I just clicked it. Now it says Original Sound for Musicians on. So,
Yay!
oh, that was deep. Okay, so here's C. Here's A. That's 440 hertz. Then run through a bunch of filters and shit.
Nice.
That's awesome.
So Jason, take that, edit it into the appropriate part about 20 minutes ago.
I hope Jason doesn't like curse me or something. You think he's out there right now scribbling Deficciones and planning to come to Portland, Oregon, and
I think we're giving him a drinking problem.
Hey, Jason, can we keep the rest of this to the C that Erik played earlier?
Well, he's gonna have my recording.
Oh, excellent.
Which should have that stuff in it. Anyhow, right, the labels thing. So I think I agree with what we've I feel like we've come to a consensus on on the labels thing. I guess what I was kind of surprised at was the idea that occultists were so separate from pagans, because I had never really pondered that. It hadn't really occurred to me that was a separation. But now I honestly don't know that I can answer the question. I need to experience a little bit more, perhaps, now having that question in my head.
I will say, like, one of the biggest conferences in North America now is Convocation, and we started off as a Convocation started from the Magical Education Council, and so where does one begin and the other end is kind of an open question. It's become one of the biggest conventions for pagans and magic folk and occultists in this section of the world. So, like, okay, we're all getting along together in any case. So, like, I also see your point in that, like, after a certain point, these labels are nice, but what function are they serving?
Yeah. Do y'all go to Convocation?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I
think you should come along.
I was pondering it, actually.
I think you would find a lot of folks to get along with there. I think that there's a lot of folks who would really dig your stuff. Unfortunately,
I really don't get along with anybody. It's a horrible problem.
Well, if nothing else, you should come out and we could have a couple of drinks and we could talk theory more.
Yeah, I have been pondering Convocation. We'll see if this year it has it in the cards. So, I mean, if Snow's there, I'll be there.
Oh, will I be there?
You should be there.
You should totally come. Just make sure Saren does not kidnap you like he did David Shee.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Who is still in the next room.
I mean, that muffled knocking sound you hear isn't nothing. We'll let him out eventually.
So, circling back.
Yes, I apologize.
No, you're good. You're good.
I feel like as an interviewee, I'm a little bit like a I don't know. I totally had a metaphor in my head and it escaped.
So one of the cool things that you have come up with and are known for on your Arnemancy work that also relates to your coding work and also relates to your creating things and your love of numbers and magic and such is your sigil generator.
Yeah, I've noticed that it's become incredibly popular. It's the page on my website that gets the most hits now. I don't know why. I can't imagine. I mean, first of all, it's an algorithm that I took out of the fourth book of occult philosophy, by pseudo Agrippa. It's probably not actually by Agrippa, but there's an algorithm in there for generating sigils from like a symbol alphabet, and I just sort of adapted it into an online tool, and I'm really shocked by how much traffic it gets. Like, people really do like it. I don't know why. I don't get any like feedback. People aren't like sending me emails being like, "Oh, this is super cool." Maybe it's just one person who hits it over and over and over again, 150, 200 times a day. I don't know.
Just load it up and then hit Command R
I
every
was
5
gonna say,
minutes.
Yeah.
I'm looking at you, Snow.
So when you came to do that, was that just oh, let's try this out and see how it goes, or was that like a conscious, oh, I can modernize this and make it digital? And
I mean, I don't think that I really modernized it at all.
okay,
The only thing that I made modern was I made it so that people could do the math easily. My thought was, so when I first was looking at it, when I was first, I mean, it wasn't the first time I looked at it, but so if people go back in time, if I have any like rabid fans out there who have been like, I've listened to everything Reverend Erik has ever done, you probably remember a conversation that I had with Douglas Batchelor on What Magic Is This a number of years ago, where we talked about the fourth book of occult philosophy. At that time, I hadn't really started playing with this technique yet, but it was because of that conversation that I started paying more attention to the book. In particular, when I had done that interview with Doug, I had gone back and reread most of the fourth book, but I had skipped the Heptameron. I was like, oh man, I've read that thing a zillion times, and I had skipped it, not realizing that the last time I'd read it was so long ago that I'd forgotten all the good stuff. So when it came up in conversation, I was like, oh, I didn't read it this time. And Doug was like, what the hell are you doing? And I was like, oh, I'm a bad guest. What could I say? But in going back through that, the sigils in the Heptameron for the different planetary archangels are these long, weird, horizontal sigils. So they're kind of like, they sort of look like they're sort of centered on a single line with a bunch of stuff around them, triangles and squiggles and boxes and things. And I was like, where did these come from? And then in the first part of the fourth book of occult philosophy, the one about the one that has like the ritual for the book of spirits and all that kind of stuff, I noticed that there was this method that seemed like it was talking about creating sigils along lines for spirits. And I was like, is this how the Heptameron sigils were made? So the only way to figure that out was to figure out how that method worked. So I deciphered, I went back to the Latin and I deciphered the Latin well enough to figure out the math it was talking about. I turned that math into a modern equation. So then I could make software to do it. I did it by hand at first, but then I made software to do it. And then I discovered that it doesn't seem like I really want it to be the method by which the Heptameron sigils were created, but it doesn't seem like that's what was used. But it must have been something similar. So that's sort of what got me started with it. And then I realized that people. So first of all, ceremonial magicians who were sort of working in Renaissance and medieval grimoires tend to just reuse other people's sigils, right? Like they aren't creating their own very often. They aren't doing anything to make their own, or it didn't seem like they were. And through this, I discovered that there are just like all these methods, especially in Agrippa, for creating sigils. And I was like, this is like this should be an artistic outlet. Like magicians should be doing this. Magic is an art. It's not photocopying, it's creating new stuff. So that's when I sort of realized how useful that tool would be for magicians who are working with particularly like astrological magic, calculating spirit names or even scrying or whatever methods that are used to like come up with new spirits and spirit names to contact. Like you need sigils for those. Like here are ways to calculate them. Or create them, and it's not, and the other thing is it's not really straightforward. It gives you like, the symbols, but then it's your responsibility to combine those into a new symbol, so there's still the magician's creativity being put into the process. So it's this combination of calculation and creativity, that I think is just like one of the things that I love the most about ritual ceremonial magic stuff.
okay, so if someone is brand new to the concept of sigils entirely,
Uh-huh.
and listening to this and maybe sort of first exploring their idea of magic and such like that. And this is their, first endeavor into paganism and occultism and such.
Uh-huh.
If someone said, "What is a sigil? What is it for? And what do I do with it?" How would you answer?
And you're asking, like, if somebody listened to this podcast and had never heard of sigils before, I would first ask, like, what astronomical chance is it that you came across this podcast full of, like, weird pagan magicians and just now are like, what the heck is a sigil anyhow? I mean, a sigil it's a symbol, I mean, it comes from Latin sigillum, which means like seal, and it's, it's like I mean, usually it's some sort of like line art, and everybody in the Western world has seen them. Like a pentagram is a sigil, a cross is a sigil, stop sign's a sigil. I mean, sigils are just symbols that have sort of like meaning encoded in them. And I think for a lot of modern occultists and magicians, I totally forgot to silence my phone. Let me just do that. Sorry, Jason. I think a lot of modern magicians know of sigils as in the genre of like chaos magic, where you're making your Austin Osmond Spare sigils, but that's the new way. There's all these old stuff. So like all of the goetic demon sigils. There's the Pentacles of Solomon. There's like all sorts of like ancient line art and cool stuff. So sigils are everywhere, man. Sigils are everywhere. That was quoting a song.
So if someone used the wonderful sigil generator that you have on your website and then went, okay, I have a sigil, now what?
Well, so that particular sigil generator is definitely part of a kind of, it's part of like the late grimoire tradition, or I don't know if it's really late. It's part of the post-Agrippa grimoire tradition anyhow, where you have you would be creating these sigils to sort of go along with some sort of planetary spirit, which would then probably be used in the creation of a magical image or a talisman or an amulet of some sort, depending on the spirit you're working with and what you want to do. That's sort of the intended use, but again, I mean, who knows what kind of weird wizard jazz people are getting up to. There's a lot of people visiting that page, and I don't know what they're doing with it.
Wizard jazz album covers.
Yeah, wizard jazz album covers. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think that my intent, or at least the way I use it, is to create sigils for spirits that are then used in talismans. Other magical workings. So it's sort of part of a full magical working.
So do you look at as sigils as ends of themselves or merely as part of the magical toolkit?
They're part of the magical toolkit for sure. Yeah. For me. I mean, I don't know how other people use them, but that's how I look at them.
Gotcha. I suppose something you mentioned earlier about the creation of names or the creation of entities through sigil magic. Is that something that you've worked with in your own milieu?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I don't necessarily think of it as the creation of entities as much as sort of being there for their creation. So it's kind of like every instant in every place. So if you work with a spirit model of magic, let's back up a little bit. If you work with a spirit model of magic, you're kind of, I mean, first of all, you're running into like a weird place because the spirit model, like especially in the Western world, sort of predates, empirical science and physics and all that kind of stuff. So in the old days, it was sort of like, everything had gods in it. I can't remember. It was some
Thales.
ancient. Yes, thank you. So like, everything has gods in it. Or the idea was that every action that happens is because spirits are moving things, that they're, this is before the concept of like physical forces and stuff. But but still with astrological magic, with sort of like, you know, star magic, there's this concept of like each instant or each change in the space weather sort of brings forth new spirits all over the place, you know. So you use an astrological election to calculate the name of the spirit for the time you're trying to capture, for the election you're trying to capture. And then once you have that election, you can use that election to calculate the name of the spirit. And then once you have the name of the spirit, you can calculate the sigil for the spirit. So it sort of allows you to harness or take advantage of a spirit being created or emerging or coming into its time or hitting puberty or having its spirit bar mitzvah or whatever. Like you're sort of part of, I mean, maybe then the magician becomes part of that spirit's initiation into usefulness in some way. I don't necessarily have
Ooh, that's neat. I like that.
I just made that up, so that was magic jazz. So I'm not really sure entirely what the method, what the intended you know, philosophy behind it is, but that's kind of how I look at it, if that makes sense. You're gonna get a lot of grumpy astrological magicians writing emails about this one, probably.
There are dozens of us. Dozens!
Dozens!
They can cool their heels with
You're going to get upwards of 20 emails.
cool Keytar jams with the planetary spirits.
Oh, Jason, that's a good title for the episode.
Keytar jams for the planetary spirits. So what would you say your kind of regular practice looks like? And is it primarily magical, or are there devotional elements, or is that very much inseparable for you?
It's inseparable for me. Mm-hmm. My ordinary practice, like, you know, just run of the mill, not doing anything else that day. It's, you know, like Orphic hymns. I use, you know, I'm a hermeticist, so I have like hermetic prayers. I'll do those, and then some Orphic hymns, maybe light some incense and some candles, and maybe play a little bit of music, and then sort of close things up. I keep it real simple. Like it used to be, you know, when you're going through that like modern magic stuff, like every day you need like an hour set aside for all the weird ass rituals you're doing. But over time, it just gets so exhausting. And so eventually, like I never really use many of those rituals at all anymore. I don't even know the last time I did an LBRP. That was a long time ago, probably.
So a ceremonial magician who's not that into ceremony anymore.
Oh, I love ceremony, just not Golden Dawn.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's more kind of high days and holidays.
Yeah, I mean, there's still ritual to what I do,
mm-hmm.
You know. Yeah, I guess that's another label that I'm not super happy with, is like ceremonial magician, because it turns out that when you ask people what they think that means, nobody really agrees on it. So I guess
as with every other label.
As with every other label. So I'm not really sure that it's a super accurate label for what I do, but you know, I mean, I started off with Golden Dawn stuff, and I don't use any of it anymore, but I still use plenty of ritual. Like there's barbarous names galore, and, you know, there's still sort of a framework to everything that I do. You know, I mean, there's still ritual and ceremony involved.
All right. So one thing that you do, which comes up on your website, is you officiate weddings.
That's true.
So,
and that's definitely ceremonial and definitely magical,
right?
Because I'm not on the church's payroll.
So, what does that look like in sort of the Christian overculture, and sort of how did you arrive at doing that?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so I got ordained as a lark back in the 90s when I was a physics student in the college in the United States university system. But and I'm a reverend in the Universal Life Church. But you know, when I eventually like went and like read about them, I was like, oh, I agree with this. This is a good philosophy. It's basically like everybody has the right to worship how they want to. I'm like, yeah, totally, I agree. Well, in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, a really dear friend of mine got married, and he and his spouse both had really large groups of siblings. So they were both like, he came to me and he was like, Erik, I want you to be in the wedding, but we agreed that our the groomsmen and the bridesmaids were just going to be our siblings. So do you want to officiate? I was like, hell yeah, that sounds fun. So that was the first wedding I did. And that one I didn't necessarily take, my approach towards it became far more serious and in-depth as time went on. And I honestly haven't had the opportunity to do a whole lot of like really amazing, like, pagan themed or magic themed ceremonies, but I have been able to do a few of them, or at least infuse stuff into them. My default wedding ceremony has sort of a hermetic a theme that kind of runs throughout it that normies won't pick up on, but I do. I'm like, hey, this is hermetic. But like I've gotten to do some really really incredible, like full on, like out in the woods dressed in magical robes with huge censers full of incense pagan ceremony weddings and things like that, and those have been really really amazing. And I guess I just feel like, because of the types of devotion that I've been doing over the years, it fits with my worship. I'm speaking hesitantly because there are parts of it that are private that I won't reveal, but like one of the deities that I work with a great deal is Aphrodite or Venus. I usually think of them as Venus. And so through that, it just sort of fits together well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
But I also think that there's something, like I do magical practices around wedding ceremonies, so I'll do like purifications and, consecrating of ground and, divinations and stuff like that. So I incorporate my personal practice or my practice into the wedding itself. I do consider it to be a magical operation for sure. Even if I'm, hitching atheists.
And do you astrologically time them as well, or?
I do not. That the weddings are culturally fraught operations,
Mhm.
and frequently people planning weddings do not come to me before they pick their date, and also frequently people who are planning weddings do not have the liberty, the flexibility needed to do astrological timing for weddings. So, a lot of times they're limited by venues, or they're limited by, friends and family availability, or they're limited by their own availability, and they don't necessarily have the resources and flexibility to do astrological operations on their weddings. So I don't usually do that. I'll usually look, but I won't, I don't like record the charts of all the weddings I do to chart out how successful marriages are or anything like that. Although that would be really, really good data.
Yeah, I can think of some astrologers who'd probably pay you for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Those same 20 who are already writing you angry emails about what I said earlier. Now they're stopping and they're like, hold on, let's not piss them off.
Yes. We can use this. So, we've mentioned it a few times and sort of mentioned that it is what you're known for. How did Arnemancy come about? How did the website get started? How did the podcast come about?
So the website, the name itself, I don't remember who came up with it, but it was like I was, having dinner with some friends and someone made some joke about it. I think at the time I was kind of low on work or out of work, and I had decided that I was going to pick up some carrying around money doing tarot readings. And I was like, oh, I'm going to need a website for this. So I'd started working on it, and I was like, oh, I need like a name for the website. What am I going to use? And I think somebody came up with the word Arnemancy as like a joke, based off of my last name. And I was like, cool, I'll do it. So that's sort of how that started. And it didn't take very long before I got kind of like tired of just doing tarot. I wanted to be able to talk about all the weird ass stuff that I do. So over time, it has really evolved. And I mean, the website's like 10 years old now. And then podcasting, I got into podcasting accidentally, where a friend of mine who had a podcast was listening to me tell a story that I would never tell on a podcast. And he's like, Erik, you have so many good stories. We should do a podcast. And I didn't know anything about them. So I was like, yeah, sure. I thought he was just talking about an episode. And then before I knew it, he'd set up this whole thing for us to run a podcast. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. Let's see how this goes. And then that eventually morphed into the Arnemancy podcast, which is now 5 years old.
Congratulations. That's a hell of a
thank you.
thing.
Yeah. So I think combined with my earlier podcast, which was My Alchemical Bromance.
That's awesome.
I think I'm on like 7 or 8 years now of podcasting. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So have you found podcasting's had sort of an influence on your views and your practice, or do you kind of feel like that's been kind of steady sailing and the podcast has gone around it?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, I feel like if you are any sort of, curious pagan or occultist or magician or anything, and your work brings you in contact with this many others, it would be foolish to not be influenced. I've learned so much, and I've come across so many new ideas and talked to so many people who are like so much smarter than I am. Like, it's absolutely influenced and changed my practice and what I do and all that kind of stuff, for sure. And I hope that it keeps doing it. Like, I want it to. It's a learning outlet for me.
So kind of putting you on the spot, what are some of the sort of greatest takeaways you've had from 5 years of doing the Arnemancy podcast?
That is a tough one. I think probably one of them was, through the podcast stuff, I've become friends with Susie Chang, and she's one of those people, like her mind, it's like beyond comparison. She has a mind that is just fascinating, and I will never be able to match the way she thinks about stuff and her ability to hold things in her head. But she really sort of influenced and changed the way that I approached tarot, which was kind of amazing, after doing it for so many decades, to run into somebody who just sort of like changes it all just with a couple conversations, and you're like, okay. And then I think also podcasting led. So I'd been really into like the art of memory and working with the art of memory for a long time, but it wasn't until Scott Gosnell started doing his translations of Giordano Bruno's stuff that I really was able to get like full exposure to like original materials on the art of memory through Giordano Bruno, and talking to Scott and reading his translations. Really, really helped me sort of break open a lot of barriers there and changed some of my approach and changed the way I looked at it. And then, I mean, just beyond that, like, I think I probably got exposed to astrological magic because of podcasting. I think I probably, look, I've made so many friends because of it, and have so many people to talk to and collaborate with. Like, I don't know. It's hard to draw the line. I would say huge chunks of my practice have been changed and altered by people I've met and ideas I've come across through running a podcast.
And it is a very enjoyable podcast, I can say, as a long-time listener.
Well, thank you. That makes me feel very good.
We will have links to it all over the promo for this and in the show notes and such for people to go check out Arnemancy.
Sweet. I hope Jason has a list of all those.
He will. We've got show notes.
So on the point of kind of networking and meeting people, that is something that Freemasonry is sort of known for.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So what in your experience are sort of maybe some of the biggest misconceptions from Freemasonry, and what are some of the best things that you've gotten out of Freemasonry that you can kind of talk about?
I mean, the biggest misconceptions about Freemasonry, oh God, that's such a huge list. I mean, most people have no friggin' clue what Freemasonry is.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably one of the biggest problems. You know, they think of it as like a shadowy secret society. They think of it as, you know, I mean, conspiracy theorists love it still. I think that's probably one of the biggest problems. Like, people just sort of believe any conspiracy without,
Right.
you know, looking things up and figuring out what it's actually about. So that's a really tough one. Also, I think that Freemasons themselves have a lot of misconceptions around Freemasonry or about what it is. First of all, while I do belong to one of the mainstream Masonic groups in the United States, I don't believe that Freemasonry is defined by the mainstream group. You know, I think that Freemasonry is sort of a much broader philosophy and a much broader practice than is just, you know, defined by like the big Grand Lodge systems in the United States and UGLE in England and stuff. So I think that's but also even when it comes even inside like the Masonic philosophy or like the Masonic practices, like I have a lot of opinions that are, I guess, what you would consider heterodox compared to most Freemasons. So it's really hard for me to answer that. I think that Freemasons themselves are frequently plagued by misconceptions about the craft. So that tends to be a problem too. You know, there are a lot of Freemasons who are like, oh yes, we're descended from the Knights Templar, or, you know, I mean, there's so many. It's exhausting. I try to correct them, but that's exhausting too.
So I guess on that point, maybe it would be better just to ask, what is Freemasonry then?
Freemasonry is an initiatory system. It is an initiatory society that teaches a moral and ethical system using symbolic allegory based on medieval architecture. I think that's probably the easiest way to put it. It attempts to teach people sort of kind of, you know, what would be considered like the classical Western virtues, and how to practice them and what to do with them and how to treat other people. It's very much sort of a way of getting individuals to be better examples by acting like good people, you know.
So
That's, I think, what it looks like on the surface anyhow.
okay, so just kind of envisioning the comment section upon mention of the phrase classical Western virtues.
Oh yeah, so I would say there, you know, it starts with the seven, you know, temperance, fortitude, prudence, and justice, and then it adds the theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity.
Okay.
So you've got those seven, you know, four of them being sort of Platonic from the Republic, and the other three being from, I don't know, some Christian dude very early on. And then it sort of fills it out. There are other sort of virtues that are mentioned throughout the degrees, because there's a ton of degrees. There's more than we can count. And usually those virtues are symbolized by various archaeological implements, or I'm sorry, not archaeological, architectural. You know, like the square and compasses, the most famous symbols, but there's also like, you know, the plumb and the square and the level, and, you know, the scarret and the pencil and the tripod and like all this stuff. There's just tons and tons of different symbols associated with like medieval building techniques that are given sort of allegorical connections to the virtues. But then in addition, it sort of builds upon that. So it becomes sort of something that encourages like the practice of the liberal arts and sciences, you know, the quadrivium and the trivium. And then it sort of goes beyond that and sort of has there's this theology inside Freemasonry that I don't really. I mean, there's a theology about sort of like the immortality of the soul, the nature of godhood, although Masons don't really like to admit that it's there. There's all these sort of things that are sort of like hidden in the ritual that sort of come out as you practice it and go through it over years and years and years.
So the mention of kind of the words classical Western and secret societies and fraternal orders, does Freemasonry have issues with kind of sexism and racism and discrimination and inequality in as a sort of a byproduct or as a kind of part of that history?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's an organization made up of human beings.
Right.
You know, I mean, you can, if you point at any organization made of human beings, it's going to have problems associated with at least one of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And Freemasonry is old, you know, so it has, you know, so again, like I was saying, so like mainstream Freemasonry, or sort of the Freemasonry that you're going to run into most often in the United States is male only. But there's lots of other branches there's like co-Masonic branches that you know don't care about gender at all. There's some that are women only. You know, like there's tons of different branches of Freemasonry across the world that are doing things in other ways. So yeah, I would say Freemasonry does have problems with that. The racism problem in Freemasonry, while okay, so again, Freemasonry is so diverse that when I'm talking about it, I'm mainly talking about Freemasonry as it's practiced in the organization that I belong to in Oregon, which is an Oregon-only organization, right? But there are commonalities throughout all of them, and lots of differences throughout all of them. The racism problem, at least in United States Freemasonry, sort of fell along the same lines as the racism problem that our entire culture had. You know, so it was segregated for you know a zillion years, and when the segregation started to get fixed, it definitely started happening a little later than it should have. But that was primarily because by that time all the Masons were like old guys, and old guys don't change their ideas very much, and now most of the places you run into racism in Freemasonry, it's because you're in an area that's filled with racists. You know, Freemasonry is made up of the people who live in the spot where it's happening. You're not going to like walk in and be like, oh my God, strangers that I've never seen before. It'll be people that you know. So if the people in your community, if there are a bunch of racist old men in your community, your Masonic Lodge probably has racist old men in it. Like, it's a fraternal order. It's a social club in some sense. So it's made up of the people in the community that it is a part of. So it does definitely have those problems, but I'm not sure that it has them any more than, you know, where you live as a whole.
How sort of occult and magical would you say Freemason lodges or orders are?
That again is going to really depend on the individual lodge. So I'm in Portland, which is a city that is kind of like steeped in occultists and pagans and magicians and stuff. So there are plenty of those sorts who are part of the lodges here, because of course the lodge represents the community that it is in. So you know, so very fortunately, like there are plenty of there are several lodges in the area who have lots of sort of practitioners or pagans or things like that. If you get out into, you know, rural Oregon, where you go to a small town, it will have, you know, zero, because there aren't any practitioners out there. There aren't any occultists, you know. So that's sort of, again, you're going to sort of have a reflection of that. But Freemasonry is something that it has centuries and centuries of accumulated, you know, symbolism and ritual and all that kind of stuff. There's tons and tons of like very esoteric and occult stuff, sort of hidden in it. It's not very blatant. It's not like the Golden Dawn, where they're just right out being like, we're wizards. You know, Masons don't do that. But if you look and you spend time with the ritual and spend time working with it, you'll see it. It's very much sort of hidden in a more classical sense and not in the Golden Dawn or Thelema sense.
So, would you say that the Masonic stuff and your sort of years there has had much of an impact on your own personal magical workings and sort of practices and such?
Oh, absolutely. Huge impact, for sure. I would say that I would credit Freemasonry. I think Freemasonry has done a better job making me a better person than magic has. But also, since I started them at the same time and I've sort of been practicing them side by side for the same amount of time, it's really hard to say. Like, maybe my magical practice, maybe theurgy enabled me to be sort of like open to the lessons of Freemasonry. Maybe Freemasonry enabled me to be a better theurgist. Maybe they worked alongside each other well. I honestly, it's tough to say.
Egg.
Yeah, chicken and egg sort of thing. But I will say that, like, at least through the combination of the two, like, it did enable me, I think, to work at being better, or to realize that I needed to work at being better.
That's no small thing. I mean,
Oh, it's tough.
especially because like our source material and our communities are chock full of deeply immoral practices.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, being able to sidestep them however you are able to is not nothing.
I know. I mean, I still buy plastic.
I mean, putting moral purity aside for a moment, because that's an entire rant.
Yeah, and I don't think I believe in that.
Oh, yes.
I mean, it's a really troubling concept that there's such a thing as moral purity, because that means that, like, because I'm not really sure, because I mean, every soul is pure in its own way, I think.
It's a very platonic approach to the soul. I can appreciate that. I think where it comes down to me is like, if your morality is a lived concept as opposed to something you put on the shelf for when it's inconvenient.
Yes, absolutely. I think that is a huge part of it, and I think that that's the difficulty, right? Like,
and I can see how a fraternal order like Freemasonry would be an ongoing challenge to our desire to backslide, or this is inconvenient. I need to put this up on the shelf for a moment.
Yeah. It's something that really helps sort of battle the stain of cultural Calvinism that we live under in the United States.
Oh, that is a banger. I love it. Stain of cultural Calvinism. And it's got alliteration. That just, it makes my little heathen heart go bump.
Kees, and save that for a little audio clip for the Instagram.
Jason doesn't know the kind of work that he's getting into with this episode.
Yeah, normally we record and it's fairly linear, and all Jason has to do is cut out a bit at the start and a bit at the end. This one's like a collage. I'm giving Jason a scrapbook and going, sort this.
Good luck. But I mean, that's the thing about fraternal orders in general, right? Is because they provide, if nothing else, they provide a focus for life. That's why old fraternal orders like the Ordo Temporis Orientalis, I'm probably butchering that, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's not an old one. That's a new one.
Right. But I mean, the OTO and RU, the fraternal orders that we think of when we're like, oh, occultism, the reason these proliferate is because, like, the Odd Fellows and things like that, it's because they work.
Yeah.
Shock, Kel Surprise, they work.
Yeah, they do, for sure. Yeah. I totally agree. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that I've been in it for so long. I mean, again, like, you have to still do the work. They don't work for free. You know, you
Right.
still have to put in the effort, and it's hard. It's hard to hold yourself to a higher standard and then reach for it all the time. But it turns out that like that's kind of the work, you know. I mean, and it's not, you know, Freemasonry is not alone in pointing that out. Yeah, you know, you can trace it back to Musar and Kabbalah and the Corpus Hermeticum. Like all of them have these. I mean, hell, Stoicism. Like, you know, all of them have these sort of urges towards like embracing, you know, the divine traits that exist within us and
Mhm.
pursue, you know, I mean, that's usually what virtues are sort of looked at. Like they are reflections of the divine in us, and that's what we're supposed to sort of like cling to and practice more of.
So one thing that you've mentioned a few times now, which
Uh-oh.
everyone's favorite hot button topic,
Ooh.
Kabbalah.
Yeah, what about it?
So you have mentioned sort of studying Kabbalah and practicing
Uh-huh.
Kabbalah. So
Uh-huh.
first off, what kind of Kabbalah do you sort of involve yourself with? And
Oh,
then,
of course the one true Kabbalah, you know?
yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Now
of
everyone's
course.
really happy in the comment section. And connected to what kind of Kabbalah do you sort of practice and study is how do you navigate the Jewish appropriation question?
Um, well, for a long time I didn't even try to navigate that question. I mean, I started off with Hermetic Kabbalah. You know, I came across. I mean, honestly, I don't even remember what year it was. I think it was the late 90s, maybe 98, 99. I remember it was cold. I was in Ashland, Oregon. I remember the name of my teacher. He was a high up in the OTO, and he was teaching these Hermetic Kabbalah classes. I think we were following along with, you know, Dion Fortune or something of that nature. And so Hermetic Kabbalah is how I got started. And then it wasn't too much later and before I got exposed to, you know, Jewish Kabbalah and that kind of stuff. So my practice has like really, really evolved over the years. And my approach to Kabbalah now is kind of limited. It's mostly study. Like I don't do a lot of new Kabbalistic exercises or new Kabbalah. I don't, you know, I'm not, I don't pursue it as much, primarily because the question of Jewish appropriation like really bugs me. But I had a great conversation with Dr. Justin Sledge about it. And I believe that conversation is on my podcast in my Agrippa series. And, you know, he sort of brought up that, you know, is it really appropriation? You know, we don't have access to the stuff that the secret schools of Kabbalists don't want us to have access to. Like all of that stuff is still in manuscript form. It's all in, you know, medieval Hebrew cursive that nobody but them can read. And so the only thing that we're really able to get a hold of is the stuff that's been made public anyhow. So I don't yeah, I mean, I feel uncomfortable about it, and I don't always know what the right answer to it is. I try to approach it real cautiously. You know, everybody is the wrong word to use. Occultists frequently want to learn Kabbalah. Freemasons frequently want to learn Kabbalah. So, you know, I approach it in a pretty cautious manner and try to address the fact that like there's some real problematic parts in the history of Kabbalah. You know, I mean, Christian Kabbalah might have started off innocently enough, but it turned into like a really horrible tool in like the whole, you know, Renaissance Christian polemic tradition and that kind of stuff. But then like a lot of that kind of got washed away or forgotten about. And by the time Christian Kabbalah got, you know, remunged up by the Golden Dawnies to turn into, you know, the Hermetic Kabbalah that we have today, it, you know, there are still symbols from Christian Kabbalah in Hermetic Kabbalah, and some of them make me cringe a lot. But I don't worry about it so much because most of the people using it are not aware of the history or don't really use those symbols in the same offensive way that they had been used, you know, in the 1500s, 1600s. So yeah, it's a difficult question. I think it's something that anybody who studies Kabbalah needs to be aware of, and anybody who practices any form of it really needs to spend some time thinking about. I don't have an awesome answer, though, except listen to your Jewish friends, see what they have to say.
Honestly, I don't think that expecting everybody to have the perfect answer is reasonable. And
Well, that's good because I feel like I let Snow down. He looks really sad.
poor bastard's trying to get a drink of water. But the thing with one of the reasons that I'm so happy that you gave the answer that you did is because like everybody has given us a different answer. Um, you know, generally speaking, like the answers I get have been, whether it's on the show or whether it's in person, is like, yeah, appropriation's wrong. We all agree with that. Full stop.
Mm-hmm.
But what I really appreciate is that when folks such as Dr. Sledge or Jewish friends have come forward and be like, all right, look, we appreciate that you're worried and concerned about this, but there's
Mhm.
avenues like that you're maybe not thinking of. And it's like, yes. It's like to your point of like talk with your Jewish friends, because like what you look at as a concern versus what their communities have as concerns may be very different.
Yeah.
And that's the danger of non-Jewish folks speaking over Jewish communities on the question of Kabbalah.
Yeah, for sure. And I can't, I honestly can't. I mean, because this is Portland, I have a neighborhood Kabbalist.
Nice.
That's a very Portland thing to have.
I know. But he's a great guy, and like he's led before the pandemic, and even over Zoom during the pandemic, he led like Kabbalah study groups, and we went through Kabbalistic texts, and I was like, I think I might have been. I mean, I think there were a couple of non-Jews there, and I was one of them, and he's totally like, join us, come and learn. Let's do some weird Kabbalah. But at the same time, I know that there are also, again, like Kabbalah is such a huge category. Like it's extremely varied. So not every rabbi and not every teacher is going to have the same thoughts and approach. Not every Jewish community is going to have the same feelings about appropriation. Not every Jew is going to have the same feelings about appropriation. So I think it pays to be really cautious, and I think it pays to be respectful. I think it pays to talk to Jewish friends and teachers honestly about it if you're trying to learn Jewish Kabbalah or Hermetic Kabbalah. And I think that also, sometimes like a lot of magical and mystical practices, like some parts of your practice should just remain private and yours.
Oh, that's a question I had. And this was back earlier in the episode when we were talking about podcasting.
Uh-huh.
How do you decide what to share and what not to share as part of your work?
Well, I just roll dice.
That's fair.
No. Well, I mean, I have lots of parts of my magical practice that I don't share.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that is just based on, there are things that I want to keep private, things that but also in my personal life, like I try to not share very many details of my personal life in podcasting. It doesn't always work very well. That's a question that I've had for a long time. When I first started podcasting, Alex Bolin, who is on the John and Alex Hate Stuff podcast, and also my other podcast, WizBiz. He's been podcasting for like a zillion years, and he sort of was my mentor for a little while. And he was like, "Oh, you're going to start sharing things about your life that you never thought you'd tell anybody." I'm like, sounds terrifying. And I don't know if I've ever really done that, but I'm sure that my boundaries have shifted. I'm not sure that they'll stay the same tomorrow. I'm
That's
not
fair.
recording a podcast tomorrow. I'm probably not going to talk at all tomorrow because this is a lot of talking right now.
Well, I really appreciate you being willing to dig into so much of this, because it's one of the joys of having a long format show, but it's also
Uh-huh.
just one of the joys of having these conversations is to sit down and really get into the thick of it with folks.
Yeah, yeah. I've enjoyed it too. This has been a I'm sorry that some of my answers have taken us on strange journeys. Um, I hope that the listener wasn't too annoyed. But sometimes sometimes the answer you want to give doesn't match the question that you've been asked.
Yeah, don't be sorry for rambling. That's part of the way this
Okay.
podcast goes. I think that's part of the
All
loveliness
right.
of
Well,
it.
cool.
Not
Yeah.
not only that, but I think that it's also some of the answers that you've given needed to have that meandering, wandering feel to it in order for you to get to where you needed to get to. Like it's your own journey in magic and Freemasonry isn't a straight line.
That's true. It's not. It's been and I mean, some of the questions you asked really made me think about stuff in ways that I hadn't really pondered before, and I really really appreciate that. It made me think about stuff from a different direction.
Thank you. That's excellent.
Yeah. So do we feel like this is maybe a good point to kind of start wrapping up then?
Hmm.
Sure.
So, Reverend Erik, for the
Yes.
people
No.
interested in and curious about all the things that you do, all the things that you're going to do, and all the things you have done, where can they go?
The best place to go is arnemancy.com. Should I spell it? A-R-N. Oh, shit.
That's interesting spelling.
EMANCY.
Yeah. A-R-N-E-M-A
NCY.
Arnemancy.com. Yeah, go there. At my website, I've got my podcast on there. I've got my blog on there, all the stuff that I'm working on. I do it like, I know that this episode's going to be a lot of work for Jason, but if you think it's going to be done by the end of the month, Jason, I do have like some stuff coming up this month. I have a live stream with WizBiz that I'll be doing. I'm not sure what we're going to be doing on that. That'll be on the 28th, as long as the 28th is a Sunday. If the 28th is not a Sunday, then that's not the day it'll be. Oh shit, the 28th isn't a Sunday. It's probably like the 27th or something. And then on Halloween, I'm going to have my 5th anniversary live podcast recording, and that'll be at Dark Star Magic. And there will be links on the website where you can get that. Oh yeah, so 27th is a Sunday, so that's when the WizBiz live stream will be. But then the live podcast recording will be at Dark Star Magic on Halloween itself, and my guest will be Eric Purdue, the translator of 3 books of occult philosophy. Yeah, aside from that, like on my website you'll find I've got like classes and lectures. I've got the sigil generator tool and also for stuff for generating names from elections and all that kind of cool stuff. And then, yeah, that's, I think, it. You go to the website, you'll find everything you need. And lots of stuff you don't.
Well, I really appreciate you spending so much of your evening with us and spending so much time talking with not only your journey, but all the different ways in which your life has been touched and continues to be touched by magic. This has been really fun.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed being here. This has been a delight. Y'all seem pretty cool for pagans.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah.
So, really quick, since
Uh-huh.
our lovely guest has plugged their pluggables, Snow, where can people find you?
You can find all my stuff at snowthegoth.com or go to linktree/snowthegoth and you will find all the things what I be doing.
Emily?
Streakingfate.wordpress.com. Sarenth?
You can find my work on sarenth.wordpress.com, and you can also find my other works on patreon.com/Sarenth Odinson. If you would like, you can also follow me on my YouTube lives, which are the first Tuesday of the month at 9 p.m. EST, which is Three Pagans on Tap, where we talk about everything from spirituality, animism, polytheism, spirit work, magic, etc., and over drinks, sometimes with alcohol, and sometimes on mocktails.
Sweet.
Generally, yes. So I really want to thank. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and for all things around Grandfather Fire, you can head to aroundgrandfatherfire.com. If you want to help support the show, patreon.com/aroundgrandfatherfire. We also have a great Discord server with lots of stuff happening there and lots of different people from all kinds of practices and traditions. You don't have to be a Patreon member to join the Discord server. And links for the Discord server are on aroundgrandfatherfire.com. We had someone join the server recently saying they'd struggled to find how to join, having been a long-time listener. So if you go to the website, there are links on the website to join.
All right. And
Cool.
I think that's going to wrap us up. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you for our Patreon members. Thank you for our listeners. Thank you to all the members of the Discord, all the folks joining us for the first time. Thank you so much to our guest. So we will see you next time around the fire.
And also extra thanks to Jason, who, if he has made it this far in his editing journey without having a mental breakdown, is a true hero and will be remembered by all the gods.